I pulled into my driveway just after dawn, smoke still clinging to my gear like the memory of last night's inferno. We'd spent 16 hours fighting a brush fire out near Dry Creek. 16 brutal, breathless hours cutting brakes, dragging hoses, and saving 3 homes that would have turned to ash if we hadn't arrived when we did. I hadn't slept, my back ached, my lungs burned, but for once I felt proud, until I saw the envelope taped to my front door, white crisp official HOA letterhead staring back at me like a sneer. I ripped it open, half expecting a neighborhood safety notice or maybe a thank you for the lives my crew had saved. Instead, I found a $500 fine violation, unauthorized commercial vehicle parked overnight. The so-called commercial vehicle, my fire engine stationed less than 20 feet from my front door, still dusted in soot and streaked with honor. I stared at the letter, dumbfounded, before reading it again. Then a third time. There was no mistake. The Oak Ridge Valley Homeowners Association had just fined me for parking the very truck that had, quite literally, prevented their neighborhood from burning to the ground the month prior. I stepped back and looked at my truck, a 2009 Kia Sabre Pumper, city certified, fully operational, and tagged with volunteer service decals. I'd personally bought and maintained it as part of our local auxiliary unit. When response times slowed or flames spread faster than municipal crews could arrive, we were the ones who rolled out first, but to the HOA apparently it was just an eyesore. I walked inside, stripped off my gear, and stood in the kitchen, letting the hum of the fridge settle my nerves. My name is Tom Garrett. I'm 42 years old, a firefighter for over 2 decades. Moved into Oak Ridge Valley 5 years ago after inheriting the house from my late uncle. I liked the quiet, the open skies, and the sense of community, or at least what I thought was community. Then Deborah Sanders became president of the HOA. She ran unopposed after the last guy moved to Arizona. Retired dentists ran the meetings like Sunday brunch. Deborah, on the other hand, treated the HOA charter like scripture. She issued citations for lawn, height, Christmas lights, and once tried to enforce a no barbecue rule on weekends. And now, apparently, she had declared war on my fire truck. I called her directly, no point in emailing. She answered on the first ring, her tone already laced with faux civility. "Tom," she said, voice sugar-coated. "I figured you'd call. I just got back from the Dry Creek fire. I began that truck you fined me for. It was there, saving homes, saving lives." "I'm sure it was," she replied unbothered, "but that doesn't change the rules. Commercial vehicles aren't permitted in residential driveways overnight. It's in the charter. It's not commercial. It's emergency response. I'm part of the certified volunteer unit. I understand your passion," she said, drawing the word out like it was something she'd scrape off her shoe. "But the aesthetics matter. Families move here for peace and order. Your truck is disruptive." I swallowed hard, jaw clenched. "So you'd rather I park it off-site? Add a 10-minute delay when a wildfire breaks out next door?" "That's not my concern," she said, tone crisp. "Your violation stands. You're welcome to appeal it at the next HOA meeting. Good day." She hung up. I stood there staring at the dead line, disbelief curling into something darker, rage, maybe, or something heavier, because this wasn't just a fine. This was a statement. To Deborah, order mattered more than lives. That evening I parked my fire truck in the exact same spot, right in front of my garage, polished and proud. Then I took a chair onto my porch and sat there with a cold drink, watching the street as neighbors walked their dogs and gave me quiet nods. Some smiled, others offered awkward thumbs-ups, a few looked away, but the one thing they all had in common, they knew who would come running if the flames ever rose again, and it wouldn't be Deborah, it would be me. And now, I knew one thing for certain: if she wanted a fight, she'd just picked the wrong man to burn. The next HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige, soulless box that smelled faintly of lemon-scented floor polish and passive aggression. Fluorescent lights buzzed above a semicircle of plastic folding chairs. I arrived in uniform, clean-shaven, clipboard in hand, ready to appeal the fine with logic and documentation. Deborah Sanders was already seated at the front table, wearing a red blouse starched as tight as her smile. Her eyes flicked to my boots, then to the patch on my shoulder. Disapproval radiated off her like heat from a smoldering ember. "Mr. Garrett," she said, adjusting her glasses, "we'll keep this brief." I stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here tonight not just for myself, but for the safety of this community. I've brought official certification from the county fire marshal confirming my fire engine is a registered emergency response vehicle under volunteer status. It's not commercial. It's protected under state law." I passed copies of the letter down the line. A few board members murmured as they skimmed the pages. An older gentleman, Greg Sumner, cleared his throat and gave Deborah a hesitant glance. "He's got a point," Greg said. "The state recognizes these vehicles. HOA rules can't override emergency exemptions." Deborah didn't even blink. "We're not overriding anything. We're enforcing visual compliance. The vehicle may be allowed under law, but it doesn't change the fact that it diminishes neighborhood cohesion. We have standards." "Standards," I echoed. "We're not talking about a rusted van. That truck is clean, city inspected, And the fastest way help arrives if one of your homes catches fire. That's not an eyesore, it's a lifeline. Yup. Emotionally, she replied coolly. Understandable, but irrelevant. Aesthetics matter. A slow, skeptical silence settled over the room. Then she dropped the bomb. As the board sees no compelling reason to alter our current interpretation of vehicle guidelines, she announced, Mr. Garrett's appeal is denied. The fine stands, and effective immediately. A secondary fine of $100 per day will be added for non-compliance. Gasps rippled from a few attendees. That's ridiculous. Jason, a neighbor and retired EMT, rose from his chair. You can't punish someone for being prepared to save lives. Deborah smiled like a cat who'd cornered a canary. If he feels that strongly about it, he's welcome to move. I didn't speak, didn't raise my voice. I simply gathered my documents, nodded once to the room, and walked out into the cool night. But something had changed by the next morning. The neighborhood was buzzing. People whispered. Some nodded at me with quiet solidarity. Others avoided eye contact, not wanting to be on Deborah's radar. By midweek, things escalated. Deborah had sent someone to photograph my driveway for evidence, and the images were plastered in the HOA's digital newsletter with the headline, Compliance. Reminder, unauthorized vehicles undermine community standards. My truck, my house, my name blurred but not well enough. Then came the lien notice taped to my door. Unpaid fines, it read. Total now, $2,100. It was war, but not the kind fought with fists or fire. I went quiet. I parked the truck off-site. Her think she'd won. But I started doing some research, real research, not on Deborah's fences or yard signs. On the open land behind her house, that patch of tall grass and dry brush near the HOA offices, city-owned, and every year, the local fire department designated it as a controlled burn zone for wildfire mitigation. But wouldn't you know it, we were due for one. I pulled the records, checked the ordinance, and filed the paperwork. As a certified volunteer, I could submit a burn request through the department and supervise it with my team. We'd even get city oversight. Legal, legit, and right on schedule. Deborah didn't know it yet, but her little kingdom sat on the edge of a fire line. And when that fire came, well, let's just say fences have a way of melting when they're built on arrogance. The burn was scheduled for Thursday. Clear skies, low humidity, and a wind forecast within acceptable limits. It was routine, necessary. The city had approved the request 2 weeks earlier, and my crew had trained for this kind of operation a dozen times over. But this time, it wasn't just about dead brush and wildfire prevention. It was about sending a message. We arrived at dawn in full gear, a crew of 5, including 2 rookies, a seasoned chief, and myself. I stood near the perimeter, clipboard in hand, confirming our map markers and safety boundaries. We had spotters at each end, hoses prepped, water barrels filled, and a suppression unit on standby. Directly beyond the lot, just a few yards past, the designated fire line, stood Deborah Sanders' property. Her white vinyl fence gleamed in the sun, tall and pristine, stretching along the edge of the burn zone like a wall of silent judgment. From where I stood, I could see the small patio where she held her morning tea, and the garden gnome that always seemed to scowl in my direction. Deborah herself wasn't outside, not yet, but she'd been informed. Every resident near the zone had received certified notices, emails, and physical flyers. No one could claim surprise. Zone 3, ready, I said into the radio. Zone 3, clear. Ignition in 30, came the reply. We started the burn slowly. A calculated line of fire snaked its way through the brush, low and controlled, smoke curling like ghostly fingers toward the rising sun. The crew moved with precision, tamping down stray embers and wetting the boundary edges as the fire consumed dead growth. It was working perfectly until it wasn't. Around 8:17 a.m., a gust of wind kicked up from the east, sudden, forceful, unpredictable. It caught a clump of dry thistle near the edge and tossed a glowing ember straight over the containment line. It landed squarely at the base of Deborah's fence. I turned just in time to hear the hiss of melting plastic. The fire spread fast. That's the thing about vinyl: once it catches, it doesn't burn so much as liquefy. Flames ran like rivulets up the panels, curling them inward as they blackened and buckled. Acrid smoke rose in oily plumes. Someone shouted from her back patio. Deborah. She burst outside, barefoot and frantic in a floral robe, waving a garden hose like it was a sword. My fence is on fire. Do something. I kept my eyes on the flames. My team moved in immediately, dousing the blaze with practiced speed, knocking it down before it reached her yard furniture. It was all over in 90 seconds. Only the fence didn't survive. Just a twisted line of warped, blackened stumps remained, no longer a symbol of order, but a casualty of oversight. I walked to the property line, stopping just short of stepping onto her grass. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I asked calmly. She spun on me, furious. "This is sabotage." "I knew it. You did this on purpose." I raised both hands. "The burn was legal, documented, and approved. You were notified in writing. This is your revenge, isn't it?" Over the truck, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Behind me, to city. Inspectors had already arrived, clipboards in hand, noting the wind conditions and the fire's trajectory. One of them looked at her and said flatly, "Sometimes accidents happen, ma'am. You live near a firebreak zone. It's all in the paperwork." Deborah's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted between us, then to the smoldering remains of her perfect fence, and in that moment, I saw something new behind her. Fury, fear, not of the fire but of losing control. By that afternoon, she had already filed a formal complaint. It was dismissed. The city issued a public report stating the burn had been conducted professionally, with all appropriate precautions, and that the damage to the fence was unfortunate but legally protected under emergency service immunity. The HOA insurance didn't cover it. Deborah would have to pay out of pocket. And as the sun set over Oak Valley, a strange calm fell over the neighborhood. No more anonymous letters, no more camera clicks from passing cars, just the faint scent of smoke, and the knowledge that sometimes order burns when pushed too far. And yet this wasn't the end, it was the spark. Because Deborah wasn't done fighting, and neither was I. For a few days, things went quiet. Too quiet. Deborah didn't show up at the mailbox. No fresh threats arrived taped to my door. Her ceramic gnomes stood untouched, their beady eyes now staring across a fence line reduced to blackened stumps. But I knew better than to think the fire had put her out. People like her didn't retreat. They regrouped, sure enough. The silence broke with a newsletter blast. An emergency HOA session called to discuss gross negligence by residents engaging in hazardous activity. No names, but I didn't need one. The meeting was set for Friday evening. That I showed up early. The community clubhouse was already buzzing. Neighbors packed in shoulder to shoulder, whispers flicking like sparks in dry grass. Some folks nodded at me with quiet respect. Others, wary of Deborah's wrath, averted their eyes. Deborah took her place at the head table, wrapped in her usual authority like a judge draped in robes. But she looked different, strained, thinner around the mouth. Her confidence had charred at the edges. She opened with a tight-lipped smile. "Tonight, we address the matter of resident Tom Garrett and the events resulting in property damage during the recent controlled burn." I stood slowly. "I'll be brief. The burn was legal. It was announced, filed, and supervised. I followed every protocol. You exploited your role for revenge," she snapped. "I upheld my duty," I replied. "You fined me for parking a fire truck. You tried to brand it an eyesore. But when fire came, that truck was the only thing standing between your backyard and a 4-alarm disaster." A few people clapped, quiet, uncertain, then louder, and louder still. Greg Sumner, the retired board member, rose from the third row. "I'd like to make a motion," he called. "Effective immediately. We revise HOA policy to exempt emergency vehicles operated by licensed personnel." "Seconded," said Jason. The EMT. Deborah froze. Someone passed her a printed bylaw sheet. Her fingers trembled. "I still have authority." "No," Greg said gently. "You had authority. We've gathered signatures. A special vote is authorized per Section 8. Paragraph C. You're being removed as HOA President. Effective tonight." Gasps. Someone near the back cheered. Deborah sat down slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't do this. You built a house on control," I said. "But people don't want a prison with pretty hedges. They want to live." She didn't respond, just stared down at the table like she'd forgotten how to speak. After the vote passed unanimously, stepped outside into the cool night. The sky above Oak Ridge Valley glowed faintly from the distant hills, where embers still smoked from the brush we'd cleared. The neighborhood was quiet, but different. Lighter. Jason joined me on the sidewalk. "Hell of a week," he said, nudging my shoulder. "Feels like a year." I replied, "You gonna move that truck back?" I smiled. "Already did." Sure enough, parked neatly in my driveway under a soft glow of porch light was my fire engine, gleaming, ready. Not a violation, not an eyesore, just a quiet sentinel watching over the people who finally saw it for what it was. I thought back to the first time I'd rolled out in that truck. Sirens, screaming, unsure if I could really make a difference. Now, I knew better, because fire doesn't just destroy, it reveals. It tests what stands and what crumbles, and sometimes it burns away the rot just enough for something better to grow. So when the next siren echoed across the valley 3 nights later, this time from the north end, I didn't hesitate. My crew and I suited up, climbed into the cab and rolled out into the dark, and behind me the neighborhood watched. No more whispers. Only trust, only respect, only silence, broken by the roar of a truck they no longer feared but were proud to claim.